What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at why you can't sleep on Southampton in any match, and especially not in the FA Cup. They just knocked out West Ham by a scoreline of 3-1, and we're going to look at the tactics behind how they did that. Now, before we get into that, check out both my books. They're online on Amazon, and there's links in the description below. Also, be sure to check out Keyframe. It's how I'm making this video, and it's a great tool for anybody looking to create content. Now let's get right into the tactics. So first, with West Ham, they went with a 5-3-2. As we see here, with just 3 midfielders, Soucek and Declan Rice would play alongside each other in the defensive phase and forming a triangle in the midfield. Then we would have our 2 strikers, Antonio and Jared Bowen, jumping to the first line of pressure, and these 2 forwards would then press from out to in, trying to force the ball into central areas. So to take away central defenders and apply access to these players, often using their cover shadows to deter passes into the fullbacks of Southampton. Now, Southampton in their first third of build-up typically used the full width, but might be the only time they did so in possession. They played with a very narrow offensive structure that saw very vertical passing options that allowed them to progress very quickly, which can then be very hard to defend against, but easy for Southampton to then have a defensive transition should they lose the ball. We always have a double pivot, staggering themselves in the central corridor and then moving into the half spaces, giving them multiple passing options to break the first line of pressure from West Ham. And with Southampton's 4-2-2-2, we have 2 holding midfielders, which then have to be picked up from 2 of the 3 central midfielders of West Ham and 2 inverted wide midfielders. So this typically overloads the holding midfielders of West Ham and gives Southampton numerical superiority through their midfield 4. Now we have an example of how Southampton use their numerical advantage in the midfield third. We have our double pivot, and then higher up the field we have 1 inverted wide midfielder, and the other is just off our screen here. So Soucek is being pinned by the left-sided inverted wide midfielder of Southampton, whereas Lanzini and then Rice are split between their 2 holding midfielders and now the opposite attacking midfielder on the inside half space. So between the 2 forwards of West Ham occupying the central defenders and not covering the single pivot in this instance, because of the staggering of the double pivot of Southampton, we have an overload on Declan Rice, and this is where Southampton use their numerical advantage in the midfield third, forcing Declan Rice to either make a decision on which player he leaves free and putting him in a lose-lose situation and putting him in a 2v1 situation through the central corridors of the field. Now as we go higher up the field, we see a very narrow offensive structure from Southampton using minimum width from the fullbacks, vacating almost the whole wide area and playing very narrow. This allows them to transition very quickly when they lose the ball and keep the ball in West Ham's half. So with the very short passing angles, they can then play vertically very fast as well as circulate and be very press resistant. We have our wide midfielders inverting in the half spaces and pinning and fluidity using the 2 strikers as well, pinning the wide central defenders of West Ham and allowing players to become free between the lines. West Ham go with their 5-3-2 in deeper areas as well, with Lanzini sitting in front of Soucek and Declan Rice, leaving them susceptible to Southampton's use of numerical superiority, especially with the inverting of their wide midfielders. We then have Antonio and Jared Bowen as the first line of pressure, and they typically didn't drop deeper to create a 4-man midfield in deeper areas, which did become a problem for them when West Ham was defending in and around their own box. So here with Walker Peters almost playing as an inverted fullback alongside the double pivot, we have a lot of central passing options, and these players are very vertically oriented. So when players like Antonio and Jared Bowen would go and press and pick which side they would then force Southampton to play to, these players would have to press from the central corridor because there would be no defender in the wide area to use their cover shadow against, and would then create the central defenders to have more central passing options in the mutual help space almost immediately, and if they got into trouble, they would always be able to play a more direct route against this 5-3-2 of West Ham. So now Southampton, when they were pressing, they would press from out to in using the wide midfielders' cover shadows to block out the single width of the wingbacks in West Ham's 5-3-2. So what this would do, it would force the ball into central areas where Southampton had a very compact 4-2-2-2 structure that gave them a lot of positive numbers in the center of the field and allow them to have spatial control around players like Declan Rice and Thomas Souček to then go and win the ball. We see asymmetry from the first build-up three and also from Souček and Declan Rice staggering themselves, allowing them to occupy the central corridor and the half space, allowing then Lanzini and Jared Bowen to play between the lines higher up the field. Now in deeper areas, when Southampton weren't pressing, they would move to more of a 4-4-2 and look to have their weak side wide midfielder cheat to then go and press to activate the pressure and move up the field away from their own goal so they could defend higher up the field and create chances in their defensive phase. Now we see a good picture of West Ham's offensive organization phase with their staggered double pivot, with Souček playing a bit higher, and now Lanzini playing between the lines, with Jared Bowen often being accompanied by Souček overloading this right half space to try and give Southampton problems. But the ball orientation of Southampton allowed them to create numbers around the ball and effectively use their cover shadows in the defensive phase to then win the ball and then quickly go forward. And that's how Southampton beat West Ham in the FA Cup. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one.